same old trouble, villains always knocking at the door. Pretty pictures on the page, but nothing ever stays the same.
Hello, once again, everyone, and welcome to Graphically Novel. My name is Josh Wasta, a.k.a. Fallout Fieri, and with me, as always, is the Teenage Mutant Kangaroo to my AIDS epidemic.
Ooh. Wow, I'm an AIDS epidemic. I guess I got you last time, so.
It's fair.
Thank you very much, sir. And with us, as usual, the lady with more taste than both of us combined, the lovely and talented, the Baronessa.
Thank you, Bear. And it is my pleasure to introduce our guest for this show, Alysen Casaccio.
Yes.
Did I pronounce it right? Yay!
Yes.
Thank you for joining us for this episode, and I'm super excited.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm super excited too.
Before we get deep into it, we have just a couple of housekeeping notes. This is our first episode back for season 3. Woohoo!
Yay!
First note, if you, our listener, have not listened to our mid-break special that Bear came up with, in which we talked about our dream team with Vandello, check that out. That's up right now. We will probably be doing more things like that when we hit our breaks.
Yeah, that was a fun episode.
Yeah, and you can see what it looks like when Bear's driving. How could this be?
It's not pretty. It's kind of a train wreck.
Note number 2, you may have noticed that our website redirects to our Facebook page. That is on purpose. We kind of looked at the $180 that it costs a year for a webpage, looked at how many people go to the webpage versus just straight to their favorite streaming service and or our Facebook page itself. And so made the decision that while we had a very beautiful and lovely website, it really wasn't worth $180 a year.
And now people don't have to look at my face.
That too. And then number 3, we're going to do something a little different this season. Last season we introduced guests. This season I came up with an idea and we'll see how it goes. Themed drinks per episode. Nice. So, for example, today's episode is Tank Girl. And since I came up with this concept, I will be doing the first episode. Part of this is that nobody else that is getting the drinks knows what they are before we record, so that we can record the reaction to them. Because it's the first time, we've done something very special. Our Omaha agent, Jason Taylor, was able to get in a discreet paper bag the drink of choice to Alysen as well, who has not opened it, and she doesn't know either. So, this is going to be Tank Girl. And for Tank Girl loves her beer. Tank Girl's also from the 90s. Tank Girl is also from Australia. And there's one thing that beer, 90s, and Australia say to me.
Oh, Jesus.
Oh, boy.
And that is the big-ass Foster's
That is
can.
a quart of freaking...
Can I override?
Yes.
All right.
Oh, this is happening
Yeah.
right now.
Do you know, the last time I had Foster's was ironically in London, but it was the 90s.
Were you near a prison?
I was not.
Oh, well.
Now,
Every time I drink this, I want to headbutt something.
I was in an Aussie bar.
Oh, well, that'll do.
Yeah, because that's really the only place you can get it in London.
We've all had our sip of Foster's.
Not as bad as I remember.
No. Actually, and that's interesting because now you have a beer palate, right?
It's about as bad as I remember it being.
Okay.
You want to know what we were taking bets on? What was in the bag?
Yeah.
You want to know what the top runner was?
What's that?
Was it Malort?
A cake in the shape of a kangaroo penis.
Oh, well. I don't know what a kangaroo penis looks like, but I'm still scared.
Well, that's actually really funny because Tank Girl's supposed first words were cauliflower penis.
Nice.
All right. Alysen.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little breakdown? This is your first time on the show. Give us a little breakdown of your experience with comics. How did you become a reader of comics?
How
What
did
is
I
your
fall into
background?
them?
Yeah.
So in the 90s, I ran a computer gaming business, right? So we land a bunch of computers together, and it was the 90s, so we didn't buy anything. We just sort of ripped a bunch of copies of Counter-Strike and whatever, and then charged college kids and high school kids $5 an hour to sit and drink Mountain Dew and play games. So we actually hosted this business inside a comic shop. So I had like early experiences with comics, but only like in a little girl way, where your mom would get you an Archie comic or something at the store, right?
Archie.
So my very, very first exposure to what I consider to be real comics was Dark Horse.
Ooh.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
So that sort of led into things like Tank Girl.
Which, you know, we will get into the 90s and how very 90s this is.
Very 90s.
Yeah, it's basically a zine, right? Like it's
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, let's start then with the movie. Obviously, you jumped at the chance. Like when Tank Girl came up, you were like, mine. And we knew we wanted to get a female perspective, not just Jenn's, on this episode. So what is it about Tank Girl the movie? And did you experience the comic before the movie?
I did, yeah.
Okay, so what was the movie coming out like for you?
I think I thought that it was going to be, they weren't going to be able to hit the mark, right? And if you look back and think about it, there really weren't many comic book movies that had been attempted at that point that I recall, certainly. And my opinion to this day, I have a love-hate relationship with this movie. My opinion to this day is that they bought the rights to it because it was edgy and cool and funky, and then they didn't understand it. And the people involved got it, but I think the studio pushed them to make it more and more and more mainstream. And so it lost some of the edge it could have had, but it still has some glimmer of some of the coolness that the comic has.
My lovely other panelists, Bear and Jenn, what were your first experiences with this franchise?
I saw the movie first. At that point in time, I was not, at that point in time, I really wasn't into comics yet. Like I had just been kind of exposed to them, like Archie comics from the grocery store, you know, Cracked, Mad Magazine, that kind of stuff. The cartoons in Playboy. That was about it.
The cartoons in Playboy were pretty good.
They were really good. They were very funny. But I saw the movie and it had some people, some actors that I really liked in it. The soundtrack was fucking amazing. And I just really, it's not common to have, especially in the 90s, to have female lead protagonist and to show her as a strong person, you know, show that that lead as a strong person. I really enjoyed it. It was kind of weird. It was crazy, but that's the kind of stuff I like. And then that led me to reading the comic. Upon reflection, after reading the comic and thinking about the movie more, I mean, there are a lot of feminist themes in this movie. Yeah, I loved the film. I thought it was great. Bear?
This is my first experience with any of the Tank Girl stuff. I'd always known those like quirky, edgy women throughout my life, and sooner or later it had always come up in conversation. Have you ever seen Tank Girl? It's kind of like the same kind of people would tell me, have you ever seen Hobo with a Shotgun? You know, I'm just like, no, I haven't seen any of these things.
I really identify with insert one of the endless from Sandman here.
No. But yeah, you know, it was always that thing that just kind of kept popping up randomly, but I never really got around to. And after watching the movie, there was definitely a very modern, like Harley Quinn. Like I very much got the Harley Quinn, like the Liberation of Harley Quinn movie that just popped out. Got that feel from the movie. All in all, it was one of those. It was a fun ride. It was silly. This being the 90s, I know a lot of chicks that would have been in the green scene that would have just been like, oh my God, dude, you really got to come watch this movie with us.
Yep. Yeah, that sounds about right. As for me, I am not a fan of this franchise. And I think I'll get into it a little bit later. I think I identified why. by reading the comic.
Oh, when I read we'll talk about that. But.
Yeah. But I mean, Tank Girl, watching Tank Girl and us doing this episode is really Jenn's revenge for having to do Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
I will continue to have my revenge.
Yeah,
sir.
For her.
Sirs.
I didn't think this was that bad. I actually, I thought this was kind of cool.
So,
I thought this was way better than Lucifer.
What?
Right? We've had this conversation.
Yeah. And I'm not sure exactly why it was. I was just not impressed with the movie when it came out. And I watched, like, the 90s had some stuff that I probably shouldn't have liked. Stuff even with Ice-T in it, or Ice Cube in it, that I shouldn't have liked. No, it was Ice-T in this and in Johnny Mnemonic.
Yeah.
But yeah,
but they tried to make it. They tried to make it into something. They tried to write a plot, right? They tried to write one long, ongoing story, and I really do think some of that had to do with the influence of the execs who are literally asking the writers questions like, "Well, what's Tank Girl's backstory? Why do we care what she does? What's her motivation? I don't need a motivation. She's mad. It's post-apocalyptic, and she's riding around a tank.
She's
Shut
mad.
up.
She's mad. She's drunk. She's horny.
Right.
And she has a tank. What
It's
else
Benny
do you
Hill
need?
for 25-year-old chicks.
Right?
Leave it alone.
Right.
Yeah, that was kind of where I was with it. So moving on to the comic, as we'll talk about. The comic reminded me, especially to your point, it doesn't really have a plot. It reminded me a lot of a foul-mouthed, drunk, horny Archie comic, because each issue is like encapsulated in its own story. We talked about it on the Archie episode.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Right. No, absolutely not. But there's not really a thread from, one story to another, which is fine. That's great. But yeah, when you start to look at the movie, you're like, you could see where they kind of tried to, take some stuff and put it in, and it just did not come together. Although the water bottles were cool. I did like those.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's really hard. Well, first of all, I don't think you can even discuss the comic without discussing like the larger zine sort of expression, right? Which everyone likes to say that like the Riot Grrl movement started in the 1990s. And in fact, you'll even find gamers online who will say that Tank Girl started the Riot Grrl movement, which is difficult for a lot of people because, side note, it was written by dudes. Yeah. So that's uncomfortable. But the zine movement actually started with the punk movement in the late 70s, right? Which then sort of had this DIY vibe to it that then became queercore, which then became the Riot Grrl movement out of that. And that, I think, is the influence that the writers were using, living in the UK, being exposed to so much more of that than we are here in a lot of their original writings. Now, how do you take that and give it to Hollywood?
Right, you
not American Hollywood.
No,
like seriously,
no.
American movies. No, they're just like, oh, but how are we gonna sell this to like the average family? So that they're gonna want to come spend money on this movie.
Because what you really should have done is had the soundtrack done by Bikini Kill and Tribe 8, right? The soundtrack's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, and I didn't know this until I was doing research, but Courtney Love curated the soundtrack. I was unaware. Yeah.
Because she kind of became sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
She kind of became the mainstream face of Riot Grrl. And it's my understanding she was not pleased with that. And honestly, the overall Riot Grrl movement was not pleased with it at the time. They were like, thanks for the mainstream pop version of this, but cool.
Yeah.
Right. The 10 things I hate about you of Riot Grrl.
Yeah.
Getting into the comic, the thing that I noticed right off the bat, it really reminded me of some other 90s comics, especially Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. out of Yanin Vasquez. Which if anybody's not familiar with Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, there's a little cartoon called Invader Zim that was hugely popular, and he did a comic book that was called Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, and he does exactly what you think he does, and he kills people, and he uses their blood to paint a wall because the wall needs to stay wet, and it's this whole insane comic, and somebody read that and said, get that guy a Nickelodeon deal.
Right. Unlike the other comic that's very much like this in my mind, because like, you know how they hide like words everywhere and you have to like look for all the, it's very zine-like, right? It's all very collage based.
Oh, that was one of my favorite parts of the comic.
Yeah, exactly. The other comic that reminds me of that along those same vein is Hothead Paisan, Homicidal Lesbian Terrorist.
I don't know that I've read that one.
Oh my gosh, it's fantastic. And there was even like in the 2000s somewhere, there was a musical version that was done with like Ani DeFranco and a bunch of
wow.
Oh, wow.
It's basically the same sort of thing. It's a young woman who lives with her cat and she drinks too much coffee, reads too much media, and then goes out and gets exposed to the patriarchy in these really overblown like caricature ways, and then murders people. Much like Johnny Homicide.
So, first impressions of the comic then. Barry, you mentioned that this is your first introduction to the franchise as a whole.
Yes. Honestly, there were a lot of things that I saw in here that I saw a lot of Deadpool, like a lot of similarities to Deadpool, because she breaks the fourth wall often. She starts talking about how she's actually in a comic strip. The scene where she's talking about how, and this is somebody's attempt to make me go through the rest of the strip nude or, topless. Yeah. I thought the artwork was very reminiscent of, and you're going to hate me for this, but I thought the artwork was very reminiscent of Transmetropolitan.
Okay. I can see that.
Like there's a lot of like the evil grins, the cigarette hanging out of the mouth, the, randomly ranting to myself or to other people around. A lot of that in there. And like we mentioned before, just the little bits, like the little tidbits that you have to look for. They're like the stuffed animals that have bubbles and stuff, like speech bubbles and all these, random little bits around that were some of the best parts of the whole comic. All in all, I thought there was a ton of dialogue, like way more dialogue than I expected.
Yeah, it is very dialogue driven.
Yeah.
Which is interesting for something that stars a tank.
Right.
Right. About halfway through, you're like, I want more tank, less talking.
More tanking.
But I think some of that, again, not to like harp on the zine thing, but that was the purpose of the zines. It was an activist movement, right? It was all third wave feminism, and we're reclaiming words that are used against us and blah, blah, blah. Not to count all that. Like, it's all really important. But like, I think that's why it's so verbiage heavy, is because the zines at the time were like that too. And I think that's their influence.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So for those who have been familiar with the comic, I have actually not been. This is the first time I've actually read Tank Girl, the comic, just because the movie kind of turned me off of it. But I can see a lot, to your point of why I was not as invested in it, because it was Hollywooded up. But it was also Hollywooded up in a way that I don't feel a lot of movies have tried to do, but not many have succeeded in. And that is making your movie showing its comic book roots by somehow tying it to be comic booky. And I'm thinking specifically of movies that did it much better. So like Dick Tracy. The Dick Tracy movie with Warren Beatty, it wasn't like, this is a comic book. They did it through costuming and they did it through set design. And so it looked Sin City. Sin City was done in a black and white style, but it was made to look like the Frank Miller comic it came from.
The
Phantom, yeah, again. And probably the best example in my mind, and episode for later this season, Scott Pilgrim. Scott Pilgrim actually does all of the comic booky stuff and actually puts it in the movie.
Which is one of my favorite parts.
Right. But it somehow skirts the line where it's not campy, where it's not like 60s Batman bad.
Why is campy bad? That's what
Yeah.
I think. I think that's the line for you and I.
Yeah.
Like, campy is fantastic. I love campy, and you don't.
Right.
And I mean, you're talking about how like you didn't like the animated sequences.
Yeah, I
thought that was
yeah.
a great combination and a great nod to the comic. You know, because the movie was, I think the only drawback for me was that it was too, I mean, okay, think about Mad Max and how gritty and dirty and dark that is. The movie almost felt too bright.
Whitewashed.
Too clean. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And that's the only negative comment that I would have to say about the film.
And the thing to remember, I think, about the live action sequences, I think the reason they did not come off as, it's in this middle ground, right? It's in this like really beige middle ground. It's not gritty enough and not like grungy enough for the people who love the comic. It's not like comic booky enough for people who love comics in general. The director, I think, got it. The director understood, and she was totally on board. The director worked with John Waters previously.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Right? So like that dance sequence, right?
Yeah.
In Silver, like that's 100% John Waters influence, I think.
Yes.
Like,
Right.
Who
well,
decides to dance in the middle of saving your niece from a pedophile?
Oh, I don't know. I've seen a lot of musicals, so they stop and dance wherever the hell they want.
Right.
So, on that note of dancing while saving your niece from a pedophile, has this franchise aged well in a modern context, both the movie and the comic book? Or is it specifically a product of its time and it's kind of a time capsule there?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. It is definitely the film and the comic are a snapshot into that time. A lot of the themes are still very pertinent today. No, I'm just going to go with yes, it's aged well. It still fits the time, as well as being kind of that, as I said, snapshot into era in which it was created.
Yeah, I agree. It's this snapshot that says, hey, we're all about DIY and we're all about zines and we're all about being angry about the fact that things don't go the way we want, right? Like, but it does it with such a fantastic sense of humor, right?
Yes.
Like in the scene where, and I'm hoping I'm not spoiling. Can you spoil a really old movie? Maybe.
No, movie is completely on the table for spoilers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Comic, you
Comic
allude
stuff.
to
Okay.
things. Yeah.
So in the scene where basically what they water it down to is the guy leaning in and touching her face. But the scene is actually supposed to represent like she's about to be raped. She takes her thighs and cracks the guy's neck and all the Marines pull their guns and she's like, what? Right?
Yeah.
So it has all the right pieces. I don't know if it has translated well to today, except for those of us that rode along in that movement, right? If you listen to a lot of girl punk, if you were like screaming a lot about this stuff, if you thought for even half a moment, maybe I'll make my own zine, then this cartoon chick is still on the back of an old jacket in the back of your closet.
Yep.
So he's kind of on board no matter what.
Yeah.
I've always wondered if the movie didn't do well because the main character is unapologetic about her crassness, about what she wants, what she's willing to do to get it. And I wonder if it didn't do well because that's a woman in that role.
So
absolutely.
that's absolutely the case. There's a, the scene where she is in the freezer in the straitjacket. Apparently, IMDb says that was one of the scenes that the audiences loved. That there was a ton of stuff that they cut out of it, and every single joke was like comedy gold in that, right? Of course, everyone's favorite is like, hey, this straitjacket makes it really hard for me to play with myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right? And the reason the producers cut it is because they said that the actress didn't look attractive. She looked too ugly. So clearly, you don't understand Tank Girl.
Right. Well, and I also, in my research, read that the director, Rachel Talalay, didn't have any control over how the film was edited.
Right.
Which, how do you not let your director edit their own film?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I think this is common for that era where they bought something that was funky and cool and they were like, the kids are into it, but didn't understand it. And so then had difficulty letting go of that control because you got millions of dollars sunk into this.
Right.
Yeah.
And what happens if it flops?
We have to bring it back to our formula just in case. We can give it the flavor of being edgy and cool, but it has to maintain our formula so that we still make money off of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, and the one thing that I will give the movie is Lori Petty was perfect.
Yeah.
Like reading, and I really was only that familiar with her out of A League of Their Own. And then obviously she was very well versed because she was another one. She got it. She understood what she was trying to do. And she's acting her ass off to try and be the Tank Girl from the comics. It's just that everything around her isn't the Tank Girl from the comics. And that's the issue.
That's the
She is in a completely different world than, anyone else than Ice-T the Kangaroo or Malcolm McDowell or, anybody else. She thinks that she's in that episodic, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to be quirky, I'm going to be unapologetic, and then we're going to move on, and then she has to stay there and deal with Malcolm fucking McDowell.
Right. Bringing plot to the table.
Malcolm McDowell?
I like Malcolm McDowell in a lot of things. The problem is that this character was trying to be like the sergeant from the second issue that we read, where that was like her mentor figure. But in the comic, it's wacky and stupid and weird and campy-ish, and the way that's resolved. Well, that is not a villain. Tank Girl does not have a villain. Tank Girl doesn't have a nemesis. Tank Girl's
nemesis is the world.
Right.
Yeah.
But, she's effortless in it. So you won't have a struggle on film. You're just following this girl around for an hour and a half and watching her decimate everything. And that's what the comic was.
Yeah. So speaking of that character, though, let's say we remade the movie today and we went straight from the comics. How do you go to Hollywood and say, okay, I'm going to need Malcolm McDowell to be this like general, right? And we're going to go save the president from his own diarrhea. Like, I mean.
Yeah. Right? Yes.
I would love that to be done in 2020. Let's put 2020 down as the time frame for this. Because, yes.
Well, and that goes into my second question. Can you translate this for a modern audience? Should it be done? And if so, who would be the actors in it?
Yes, and let's just grab people from the Harley Quinn movie.
So Margot Robbie is...
Yes.
No.
I don't think Margot Robbie's right. I
don't think so either.
She's fabulous for Harley, but Harley is a much later incarnation of this kind of strong feminine character. Now, gamer dudes maybe don't see the difference there, right? But like, I don't think she's right for it.
Yeah, I actually had to look up her name, but Chloe Moretz, she was in 500 Days of Summer, Kick-Ass, and Let Me In.
Kick-Ass is a movie I would pull people from. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
she was Hit Girl, wasn't she, in Kick-Ass?
Yes.
She was in that when she was young.
Yeah, she was Hit Girl. But she is, I think, young enough, and I think she could, if you haven't seen 500 Days of Summer, I highly recommend it. It's very good. But she can play, like, it's just, she can turn on a dime. Like, what her character can just be like, oh, I'm this sweet person, and like, don't fuck with me kind of thing. So I think she'd be really good.
I mean, what about, this is totally out of the box and stupid, but what about all the bands that generated this sort of vibe in the first place? I mean, the women, maybe the women in Bikini Kill are still out touring, but
See,
Right?
and I would do that as. Are you familiar with Six String Samurai?
Yes.
Okay, so in that, the Red Elvises show up as and are playing a musical number during a fight.
Yeah.
I see doing that,
That is
with
the way,
Bikini
yes.
Kill, and then just have things like that happening and have it just be that indie film. See, and that's the problem. It can't be Hollywood. You have to do this as an independent film at this point, just because that way you keep those sensibilities.
Plus, why wouldn't you want to see it get a Sundance Award?
Right?
Well, also, I just remembered there is a professional wrestler whose moniker is Tank Girl, and she actually has a tank and she drives it.
Yes.
I have to look this up right now.
It's fabulous.
Yeah, she's in NXT.
Yep.
Although speaking of that, that's funny that you mentioned that, because Becky Lynch would be one of the people, because she's starting, she's having kids and things, and she might not be going into wrestling. She would be fun because she's got, the Irish accent. She's got the ass kicker, and she's not. Her most famous moments in wrestling where she legitimately broke her nose in the middle of the ring, wiped the blood over her hand, and just held it up to basically be like, "I'm coming for you." And it was and at that moment she had this whole projection where from that point on she was the man, and so she has the sensibility, that punk rock kind of thing. She would be a really good tank girl.
Also hashtag she didn't break her own nose. Someone
broke her nose.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
In that case,
Well, but the further description of where she wiped the blood instead of coming for you made it sound like she punched herself.
Super crazy. I wonder how a remake like this would impact current audiences, right? Because we're no longer 25, and in fact, one of the criticisms of the Riot Grrl movement is that it wasn't as inclusive as it could have been. It was basically middle class white chicks, right? And we could have done a better job of making it broader and actually attacking issues. But dude, it's a bunch of 25-year-olds. Did the best you could.
Right.
But now all these 25-year-olds are 45. And now I think older, more mature. We've recognized, the reason I maybe wanted to wear giant combat boots and black makeup and all black clothing is because what I was really doing was rejecting societal feminine roles. And as a 45-year-old, I can say, oh no, it's okay for me to be strong and have a little scarf with pink flowers on it if I want it. Right. And so how do you, I don't know if it can be translated, because I don't know if that same audience, we'll go for the nostalgia, but are we going to go, and is it going to be meaningful to where our lives are today?
Well, here's my question. Is it more important that the people from that generation that started the movement bring now their teenage and 20-something daughters and encourage them into something that was remade for today's audience?
Point.
Well, and I think that, bringing up what the world is today, I'm not sure that a younger audience, I don't resonate with them as much. Maybe.
Yeah, I think they've moved on to another wave of feminism. And when I talk to even millennials who are, adults, right? When I talk to millennials, I recognize how regressive my own stuff is, right? Because you don't think about it. You're just let's legalize prostitution and punch everybody in the face. Yeah. And it turns out
not everybody, just Nazis.
Really help society be more equal. And masculinity is not the opposite of femininity, really.
Right.
And so that's what Tank Girl does. Tank Girl takes on all this. She co-ops masculinity. She rides on her tank with the gun between her legs.
Right.
And I think a modern audience, younger audience, I don't know that they need to do that anymore.
Right.
Yeah, no, I would imagine that they will fixate on things like fucking kangaroos.
Yeah.
That's where you fix it.
I'm not going to lie. I was a little, fixated on that for the first half a dozen episodes of the comic. I was just She's just randomly banging every kangaroo that she comes. Oh no, it was just the one, and then she's got one that she keeps. Okay.
And notice that she's much kinder to Booga in the movie than she is in the comic.
That's very
I thought you were
Because
going
in
to
the
say
comic-
in the comic in general.
Yeah, in the comic, she's using him because he's dumb.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
So the versions that we read, I read both, but I know the physical version that we bought there was the colorized.
Yes.
The files that we had for the version were black and white.
Yep, and that was my experience
Right.
with the black and white.
And Alysen, which one did you read?
Initially, like back in the day, the black and white, but I went ahead and got the colorized version. And I actually got the first 2 books just because I haven't had anything. You know what I mean? If you guys did something on the Max, I would buy every Max comic too. It's fine.
Man, that would be a good one too. You'd have to find a media
so
copy of the Max cartoon, though, and
Yeah.
I don't think that really exists in a way that you could get it
You
easily.
could get to it.
Or the head.
Oh, right.
Did you find that the colorized version influenced Europe differently? I actually preferred the black and white version. I thought the colorized was, I thought it was over colorized, like Technicolor, like remaster of the old black and white movies.
I haven't even seen it.
Well, you know what? Here it is.
Thank
Bright.
you.
It's very bright. They use lots of greens, especially given that we're in the post-apocalyptic outback.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of green and yellow and blue.
Oh. Yeah, I don't like it.
Yeah, but do you see what I mean? It's like
It looks, you know what it looks like to me, just glancing through it? It reminds me of an Archie comic.
Bear mentioned Transmet, right?
Mhm.
yeah.
So you've got Tank Girl, and then we move into that land of Transmet. And I think the colorized version is Tank Girl after they've seen Transmet.
I wouldn't argue with that in the least.
It's also pop art. It's very, very pop art.
Yeah.
And
But
I
the
only really
colors are
know
really-
about that. I only know that phrase because it's all over my house.
It's all over your house. But I also feel like the colors are really muddy. They're kind of dull. It's like overkill, like too much color, but the colors are all in a very muted range. Even the bright color, like they are only a few colors that are bright, but it's all kind of a muddied
Right.
palette.
Yeah.
So, anyone else with any questions that they brought?
I did want to point out what I was mentioning about the politicalization. No, yes, thank you. Of the comic. So the counterculture in the UK used Tank Girl and the image and the idea to protest Margaret Thatcher's legislation of Clause 28, which was that the local authority shall not intentionally promote homosexuality or publish material with the intention of promoting homosexuality or promote the teaching in any maintained school of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship.
Wow. Which then again connects it back to sort of that zine culture and queercore, and
Yep.
I think it's everyone kind of came along with it,
Everybody jump in the tank. We're going for a ride.
Right.
Yep.
And they sort of hint at her sexuality in the movie. It's hard to pin down the sexuality of a girl who sleeps with mutant kangaroos.
Yep.
Right?
That's pretty much on the nose, yeah. If you're willing to sleep with a mutant kangaroo, well,
No?
you're probably not super picky.
Right. I guess she's a goer. But yeah, I don't know. Like at the same time, it also makes it really unimportant. Like her sexuality it's not important because she's so crass and crude, if that makes sense. She has a hat called her dump hat that she takes poops in, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And our society is like, ooh, women don't do twosies, right? Like they're just very
Right.
So
Right.
you're already flying in the face of that. It's almost like whether or not she has sex with men or women kangaroos is probably irrelevant.
Well, the other things that I found very interesting was just in the introduction, first comic in the graphic novel, they introduce her as basically, they describe her as being, crass and all that. But one of the key lines that sticks out was like knickers that haven't been washed in over a week.
Right.
And so it's just like, okay, you already figured out just from like one paragraph. We've got this woman pegged down. Now that we just want to see what she's going to do. We're not really interested. Like that's enough of her backstory for me. Like,
And
she's in it.
go ahead.
I was going to say she's in a tank. She's a dirty drunk in a tank. It's kind of like, once again, it's kind of like Hobo with a shotgun.
Right.
Except for this is the female version, and it's a chick with a tank.
Well, and she fucks a bounty because it's easier to put them unaware right after sex so you can shoot them.
No, exactly that. And I think the reason it got why there's such a love-hate relationship for a lot of people with it is that because she's not a dude. But if you take that description and apply it to a generic 20s dude in a comic, we're all bored.
Right.
Because that's the standard.
Yeah. Super unapologetic, like apathetic dude
that doesn't wash his underwear.
I work with one of those. Seriously, I've got a kid at work that he doesn't care. He's just kind of there to collect the paycheck, and that's this. But if it's a woman, that becomes more interesting because in this society, women aren't supposed to be like that. They're not supposed to be unapologetic.
Yes, and there's a weird sort of sexuality a weird sort of beauty maybe that underlies a lot of this too. That like you said, Bear, that the issue where she's like, oh, I see, somebody's trying to make me topless through the whole thing. She's not afraid of the fact that, she's got, semi-big knockers and is like her femininity is something.
Yeah, no,
right?
she's absolutely not afraid of it. She's just going to roll with it.
She treats it just as crassly as a random dude on the street would.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is the part brings me back to Lori Petty being the comic book tank girl and everything else around her being a PG-13, Malcolm McDowell movie.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's just, she is being like, oh, okay, well, if I'm going to whip my top off, I don't give a whatever, boobies, And then somewhere there's a studio exec being like, well, we have to keep this family friendly. And I'm like, well, you bought the wrong fucking property.
Did you guys see, I don't know how much research you did on like the weird trivia of the movie, but did you guys see that they actually had a scene where her and Booga are sort of relaxing after sex, and they do this shot where they show her tits and then they show a prosthetic that they made for Booga that cost them $5,000 that showed his kangaroo cock. And it was cut because...
Why haven't I seen this?
I don't know.
I think you could actually find clips of it on YouTube.
$5,000 kangaroo cock is the name of my Silverchair cover band.
You mean it's not the name of your Nickelback cover band?
No. Silverchair is from Australia. Which is populated with criminals. And criminals are used to it.
Here we go. We're going to quote this movie from that point on.
I think, so I watched it last night again, just as a refresher. I think I quote that movie in my normal life more than I realized.
I probably do too, without realizing it.
Yeah.
I will actually say I will probably watch the movie again now that I've read the comic, because there are parts of the comic that I enjoyed. And again, that I can now, from the parts that I remember, that we watched it pretty recently, there's that divide. And now I'm fascinated with that divide of Lori Petty being a comic book tank girl and everything else around her being a PG-13 movie.
Well, but I think that Malcolm McDowell does a good job of being like arguably a good villain, but he's also super comical. He's not like, he can be threatening, but I just feel like he brought a lot of comic book-esque villainy to
and he's good at giving her the spotlight.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's good at giving her the zingers. right?
Usually our last question of every episode is, would you continue reading this? Obviously, Alysen, we know your answer. As you have
I'd write it. You guys want to do it?
Oh, I'm down.
So, Jenn, is this continue to go in our collection?
Oh, yeah. Of course, it has to.
Bear, would you continue reading this?
I would put this would be a coffee table book for me.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
I would leave this out, but anybody that walks in and be like, what's this? Oh, dude, here, you read this.
Yeah.
Just flip through it.
Just take the first 10, 20 pages and, I'm going to go make us a drink. I'll come back. Tell me what you think.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we can have a conversation about gender, sexuality, and third rate feminism.
Right?
Yes.
That'll be fun over coffee.
And shagging kangaroos.
Voodoo missile tits.
Voodoo missile tits. Wow.
Name of my David Bowie cover band.
Right.
I actually would. I did enjoy the comic. Like I said, it reminded me a lot of other 90s comics. And whereas I probably won't go back and collect Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, a lot of those things that I enjoyed in the 90s just because they were gore for gore's sake. And, this one had that, but it also actually had a message. So I probably would continue. Any other final thoughts, anybody?
I want a Tank Girl doll. Did they ever make those? Because I have a Transmet doll. Action
Oh, I
figure.
do have a Transmet action figure, yeah. Came with a 2-headed cat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, Alysen, thank you so much for joining
Thank you.
us.
This was fun.
We'll see what comes up for season 4 and if we can get you back. So tune in next week. Our next episode will be Venom, which we will have 2 Joshes joining me. So we'll have 3 Joshes, a Bear and a Jenn. Like 2 guys, a girl, and a pizza place.
We're going to have Josh cubed.
That's true. Yes.
Jenn and Bear. Okay.
So we'll have Josh Staley, Josh Forbes joining us as we talk about the 2018 Venom movie, Spider-Man 3, and Venom Dark Origins, the comic.
Do we have to talk about Spider-Man 3?
No.
Okay, good.
No, it's
'Cause-
little. I tried to watch it yesterday, and I forgot that Venom or even Eddie Brock is only in it for about 10 minutes total.
Well, I walked in on you watching it, and I was just kind of like, "Ooh, do you need a moment alone?" Sorry, put a sock on the door next time.
I was about to say, would you rather walk in on me watching Spider-Man 3 or masturbating?
I think I'd rather the latter.
How
Are those my only choices?
long have you lived with me?
I know I'm going to see less disturbing images if I walk in on you masturbating.
There will be no teeth on Topher Grace, or will there?
Oh, Jesus.
Oh, no.
Anyway, join us then. Thank you for listening, and as always, take it away, Vandello.
Come with me, I'll tell a story that you might have heard before. Graphically novel, but the same old trouble. Villains always knocking at the door. Pretty pictures on the page, but nothing ever stays the same. Do 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 do. Come at me, and I'll show you something you ain't never seen before. Right or wrong, or can't we all just get along? My mask is no different than yours. Pretty pictures on the screen, but nothing's ever as it seems. Do 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 do.